Halak Darkhorn, Tauren warrior in service of the Alliance, moved among the ruins, alert for any potential threat that would harm the humans who followed him. He found Morlock footprints earlier in that day, but they were small ones, not the strange, muted versions that had become increasingly common. The Morlocks were nothing that humans could not handle on their own. They remained uneasy around him, the humans did. Part of it was that he was so much larger and stronger than they were. Of greater influence, though, was that most of his brethren had thrown in their lots with the Orc Horde. Humans saw his bestial features and assumed he was just a mindless follower of the Greenskins. Yet, Halak had learned to mistrust orcs. They seemed too quick to fight, and too willing to fight dirty, to be considered honorable. Then he learned that they came from another world entirely, and were led for many years by demon-worshipping warlocks. That was enough for Halak. His fellow Tauren might welcome the orcs as spirit brothers, but he could not abide it. Though humans were far from lacking in faults, Halak felt they possessed a core of honor. He had come to them cautiously, serving as a scout for the armored knights and their powerful paladin warriors. The order and organization of their peoples impressed him. Yes, they were distrustful of him, but then one is always distrustful of the new. All the more reason to serve well and speak quietly, reassuring them that not all Tauren were to be lumped with the orcs. The hackles rose on the back on his mane when he heard the shift of stones underneath, around a corner. He was not alone in the ruins. Halak froze, his massive chest barely rising as he waited. Another shifting of stones, then footsteps of loose gravel. Not the heavy tread of Tauren or trolls, nor as light as the various elven breeds. Human or dwarf, likely, and therefore alliance. Halak moved slowly around the corner, letting his thundering hooves warn of his approach. A female human crouched behind a tree, watching his advance carefully. She was dressed in common adventuring leathers, without an insignia or badge. Her eyes were wide, but he saw no fear in them. Probably a scout like me, Halak thought, sent ahead to see that the horde had sensed no ambushes. Still, though, he sensed no fear in her. She was clearly tensed. Halak shook his massive head. When would they learn not to judge based on surface appearances? Halak slung his axe into the sheath on his back and approached slowly, his hands out and palms up to show that he meant no harm. Halak knew that he was an imposing figure, even unarmored. "Do not fear," he said. "I am a scout working for the Alliance." The woman moved upon hearing these words, though not as Halak had anticipated. She stepped from the tree with a spear in hand, driving the tip into his chest before he could react. Halak snarled and swung at her, but she let go of the spear and danced backwards, drawing a serrated blade as she did. "Fool," Halak thundered. "I am on your side." He felt a cold chill spread through his veins from the wound, and his legs were quickly growing numb. The weapon is envenomed, Halak realized, coated with a thick paste that deadens the flesh and stops the heart. Humans did not use such things. This was a weapon of the Horde. Halak raised his head with effort to confront his assailant. The human stood with weapon ready and snarl on her lips. The Tauren staggered forward a step, then collapsed at her feet, the ground rumbling with the force of his fall. He struggled to rise, but the poison worked too swiftly. As the poison stilled his heart, Halak saw the human smile. Yala Dawnfor, human warrior in the service of the Horde, knelt before the fallen Torn. A smile lingered on her face as she began sawing off the creature's horns. Her orc masters would pay a hefty bounty for the death of a traitor. Hello, and I hope you enjoyed our little preamble. For today, I want to do a maybe quick, not so quick video about WoW's reputation system and the Renown system within WoW, and how Blizzard should lean more towards the old reputation, and more specifically a reputation from a game they helped made, and why they should step away from the Renown. So the Renown system, for those of you that don't know, was introduced in Shadowlands, if I believe, and it essentially acted as the new way reputation is gained, in a roundabout way. Not only do we have the reputations, as I was stand corrected. I stand corrected on that. So, Renown has replaced, it looks like, the reputation system of old. And essentially, that is, in essence, what it is. It's just a reworked, sort of updated version of the reputation system. For those of you that don't know what the reputation system is, let us come down to the Ardent Crusade. So the Ardent Crusade is a reputation introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, and it's kind of well known for its very grindy dailies for unique rewards such as the Argent Warhorse and the Argent Charger, along with other unique things like an Argent Squire. The Argent Squire and the Argent Gruntling for the Horde. And the way reputations worked back then was you do quests that were given to you by people of that faction, and you would gain reputation with that faction as you completed those quests. And with each quest you completed, you gain a certain amount of XP or RP, reputation point, and that went to filling this bar. Now there are several several levels of a reputation, going from top to bottom. We have exalted, revered, honored, friendly. Then we have neutral, hated, and hostile. Total of 7 ranks, with generally, back in the day, starting off at friendly with most, or being neutral with others, such as the Zandalari and the Ravenhold. Now, there were some factions that you were outright hated with, like with the Syndicate. And what would happen there is that usually, if you would attack members of this reputation, and you do manage to kill them, you would lose reputation with them. Then for some unique cases, like the Syndicate, whenever you kill them, you lose reputation with them, but gain some with Ravenhold. And the neat thing is that you could also do it in reverse, thanks to this little feature called At War, which makes those NPCs attackable. That was the reputation system since Classic up until Shadowlands, where they introduced the Renown system, as I said earlier. But as we can see, during that time, it wasn't fully phased over forwards. You did start off earning reputation with them. However, once you selected your covenant, you then started earning renown for that covenant. For example, the Ascended. If you chose their covenant, your reputation bar would still be here, but you would also gain the Covenant Sanctum add-on over here on the minimap, which would then allow you to sort of access the Covenant Sanctum in a way similar to the Class Order Hall or the Garrison before. Now, this system, the Renown system, basically was just an updated version. The Renown system was basically just an updated version of the Reputation, basically making it more flashy for the players. Sort of styling it after a battle pass like approach where you would have levels. And as you fill the bar up, you gain a new level, and so on and so forth until you reach the end at rank 25. And that's the way they've been going forward, because they added it over here in Dragonflight, and now they brought it over with them into the War Within. Now, to me, this system it's a fine system. I will give it that. But on the other hand, it's a very game system. It's not a very RPG system like the reputation systems of old. Now, what I liked about Cataclysm was that when Cataclysm launched, where are they at? When Cataclysm launched, they brought in reputation vendors into the main cities, where you actually had rewards waiting for you when you leveled up your reputation for one of the major, factions of WoW. For example, in Stormwind, you have the human Stormwind vendor. Most of these vendors were typically situated by flagged masters, making it sort of easier to find them, so you're not chasing them down all over the place. But what was neat about that is that you had rewards waiting for you at certain levels of your RP, your reputation points. Now, during the time, it wasn't much. You just had a choice of 3 cloaks. Basically, one that helped you with, one that was tailored for tanking, one for DPS, and one for healing. That sort of thing. Then you also got the City Tabard, which increased reputation gain by, I think, 5%. And then you also got a bag. I believe it was a 25 slot bag at the time. May still be that now. It's been a while since I used it. But the point is that they introduced these vendors in Cataclysm, which was a nice addition to those who earned reputation and earned Exalted with them. With these game-facing factions. But at the time, there was no rewards for them, since just last expansion in Wrath of the Lich King with the Argent Crusade, you did have faction-specific rewards within the Argent tournament grounds, but that was more tied to the Argent Crusades' reputation and their dailies. And so it was sort of there for the factions, but it wasn't there to be earned by the factions. And so they brought those vendors over to the main cities and allowed players a new way to sort of earn unique things, which was a pretty nice thing to do. So when it comes to Renown gain, as we all know, it's mostly done by these world quests that you go around. Yeah. These world quests that you go around and do, and you earn reputation that way and cool little rewards. Essentially, what they did was they took dailies away from quest givers and made it sort of natural to come across them in the world, as opposed to going to a main hub, talking to a character, and picking up the quest that way. I'm not gonna say I dislike it. It is a certain thing to do, but personally, I kind of like Final Fantasy XIV's approach to these sort of world quests, or as they call it, fates, in that you come across it, you get a little blip saying, hey, fate is active, you're now part of it, or if you're over leveled, it gives you the option to sink your level down to that fate and participate in it. What I don't like about WoW's world quests is that 9 times out of 10, when you come across them, you automatically trigger a talking head, basically telling you what's up. That sort of gets annoying after a while, especially if you're just flying through the area and then suddenly you fly over a world quest and then you just get this dialogue option telling you about what's going on in the area. Truthfully, if they just took off that talking head option and just made the objective markers come up on the side, that would be better in my opinion, as opposed to just you flying and suddenly, hey champion, sort of deal. It's just a minor complaint on that issue for me, but all in all, it's a good system to have. It makes people, I wouldn't say explore the world since it's on the map, but it does allow it to feel more natural, as if you are going out and adventuring, as opposed to simply getting a mission to do and then going out to do it and then coming back the next day. Now, with that all being said, what I do rather enjoy is the grind through these reputations, through these renowns, to get these unique rewards. Like the Expeditionary Tabard for the Arathi, and all that other fun jazz, like access to their vendors and what have you. But, as I said before, this renown system is more of a game feature and not much of an RPG feature. After all, this is World of Warcraft, an MMO RPG, a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. And so, in my opinion, what WoW basically did was take away, in my opinion, the better way to earn reputation through the normal reputations, the older reputations I mean, by naturally coming across a hub finding these daily quests from these people, gathering them, and then going out to do the quests, and then coming back and earning your reputation points that way, earning it up all the way to Exalted to then be able to purchase their specific wares. Now when it comes to the so when it comes to these reputations, like I said, I'm not much of a fan of the Renown, and I much prefer the old one. However, the old one, as we can see, is very limited, as was most of the reputations in WoW up to, well, Shadowlands when they introduced the Renown system. It's very one-sided, as in you unlock these reputations only to progress upwards through them. There's barely any factions that you progress downwards in, with only like the major ones being the Syndicate or the Aldor or the Scryers from Shattrath, where you would side with one, and siding with one automatically locks you away from the other, which was, pretty fun at the time. But as we can see going forward, there's not much in ways of the RPG aspect, the role-playing aspect of reputations. Now, that short story I read earlier in this video, was from the Dungeons & Dragons Warcraft role-playing game book. And what I liked about reading that short story and reading over some of the way they handled reputations within this D&D conversion book. Of course, in the book they called it affiliation, not reputation. Of course, that's just what they did for the book. But what I liked about that is that it didn't matter which faction you were a part of. If you were a human on the Alliance side, you could, through your campaign setting, go from the Alliance over to the Horde, or vice versa. You could have been a Orc warrior who then just defect over to the Alliance. And I find that to be a rather interesting concept, because in recent years we have been in the WoW community having talks about getting rid of the factions in one way or another. Some people are for it and some people are against it. I myself am vehemently against it, mostly because WoW, World of Warcraft as a game has set itself up on that faction identity. It's built essentially followings for the Alliance and for the Horde in this game. The only other game that I can think of that comes close to it would have to be Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO. And that's mostly because the Old Republic is set during the Old Republic, where you had the Old Republic and the Sith Empire. Those two are the mainstay factions. However, what BioWare did is that in recent years, starting with the Knights of the Eternal Throne launch, they sort of narrowed down the player. What do I mean by that? Is that in base Old Republic, you started out with being on the Republic or being on the Empire. And during the base game, you, as your character, whether you were a Jedi or a smuggler or a trooper or a Sith or a bounty hunter or an Imperial agent, you had your own unique story during base game. Then, when Rise of the Hutt cartel came out, they then focused a bit more on the factions. So you were no longer just Jedi or trooper or smuggler or Sith or bounty hunter or Imperial agent. What you were is that you were Republic or you were Empire. And that was that during the Rise of the Hutt cartel and the following, I believe it was Shadows of Revan DLCs. And that was admittedly, while a bit limiting as a on an individual RPG aspect, to go from being the Jedi, from my experience, I played a Jedi Knight. You go from being the Jedi Knight who, saved the Republic by defeating the Emperor. You go from him to being another Republic person during those two expansions. Granted, they do reference and make note of your past experiences, so it's not a total wash there. So it's a bit consistent with its past self. However, when we come to the Eternal Empire campaigns, the Knights of the Eternal Empire, and I believe it's the Knights of the Eternal Throne DLCs, they narrowed you down even more. You were no longer just part of the Republic or part of the Empire. You were then focused down this narrative story into being this Outlander. And you essentially became like this neutral force throughout that storyline. And now here we are in the after story arcs. I truthfully don't know what to call it, but I'm just gonna call it the post Eternal Throne campaign for now, until I figure out what this era we're in is called. But this post Eternal Empire campaign, you do have the option to go back into your faction. And if I recall correctly, you actually have the choice to switch sides, quote unquote. It was, in my opinion, it was a bit of a tease, truth be told. Because, of course, now with the raid classisms are in that, I'll get to that. But at the time, it wasn't introduced yet. But when we had that option, it was a bit of a tease, because if you chose the opposite faction, for example, if I was playing a Jedi, at that point I could have chosen to join the Sith. But if you chose the opposite faction side, you were basically told, haha, we're funny, go talk to your faction. Which was, a bit of a letdown, truth be told. But in recent patches, they opened up the classes for players. Granted, they're tied to your, how do I put this? Your magic use, I guess we can call it, from an RPG aspect. For example, if you're a Jedi, you now have access to, if you started as a Jedi Knight is basically the warrior of the Old Republic. With this class update, you now had access to not only your Jedi Knight and its sub-specs, but you also had access to the Jedi Consular, basically the Jedi healer. And then he also has access to the Sith counterparts, such as the Sith Warrior, the opposite of the Jedi Knight, and the Sith Inquisitor, the opposite of the Jedi Consular. Now, what's fascinating about that is that you could access, as a Jedi, the Sith classes if you were of sufficient dark side usage, or if you were more just leaning neutral, you were able to use both of them. Which I like this about the Old Republic, is that the way my Jedi Knight sort of developed is that, yes, he started out as a light side Jedi, but then the Internal Empires he became more neutral, which now makes sense as to why he is a Jedi Knight and also suspect as a Sith Inquisitor, simply because I want to be able to use those mainstay Sith abilities like Force Lightning and what have you. So that kind of player freedom brought about by narratively pushing people away from a faction system while not breaking the factions was, in my opinion, is a bit fun. Because what's unique about the Old Republic is that, yes, narratively, you were pushed down into this neutral aspect, and then you rejoined your faction. But since they gave you the quote-unquote option to switch factions, you technically could roll a specific character. For example, you could be a Jedi, but let's say you want to be, you wanted to join the Empire. Well, now you can make an Empire character and have that character eventually become a Jedi through your actions, through your Force alignment, and through selecting a Jedi class. Granted, it's a bit rocky in the fact that you couldn't exactly switch factions at that point, so it's a bit of a letdown there. But all in all, it was just a good way how they handled the factions, because narratively you did become one, but then you split back up, and then you are still the savior. You still come back to being the neutral guy for the story aspect, because that's how they get you to play the game. Meanwhile, when you're not doing story stuff, you go back to your factions and continue, fighting the Empire or fighting the Republic, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to World of Warcraft, how they're handling the factions, from my point of view, has been a bit rocky, since apparently, for those of you who are unaware, our entire shtick in the Shadowlands apparently happened in 3 years. So, narratively speaking, while we were campaigning within Shadowlands, we were stuck there in Shadowlands for those 3 years, and we technically did not show back up until post-campaign. Like, after everything was said and done, we made our way out, I guess, after we got done with the raid. Details are a bit fuzzy on that, but if you look up the World of Warcraft timeline, that's basically what it says. And what I didn't like was that, narratively speaking, taking us through a time skip while not showing us the time skip was a sort of mistake, if you ask me, because it sort of makes no sense for there to be a time skip for Shadowlands, given how the first thing we do when we get to the Shadowlands is open up a portal to our main cities. So we're not trapped in Shadowlands, as the time skip would have us believe. So it's a bit rocky there. They could have told that a bit better, in my opinion. If they, sure, this is a bit controversial, but if they locked us to the Shadowlands for that expansion and just allowed us to quest there for that expansion until the expansion was done, that would have been a bit more believable. And then, like, at the end of that expansion, we then opened up the portals to go back. Sure, that would have been a bit more believable for the time skip. But from a gameplay perspective, you don't want to lock your players to just one zone of an expansion. So yeah, it's understandable why they had the portals there, but narratively speaking, they didn't show us being stuck in the Shadowlands to necessitate this time skip that they said happened. It's just a thing that makes no sense, which leads into Dragonflight, which is an expansion that I personally was not a fan of. I didn't even finish questing in the main MSQ for Dragonflight. I just got bored with it in like the Azure span. But topic for a different day. What I didn't like from that time skip was that the Alliance and Horde became buddies during that time skip while we, the players, were away. That sort of makes it feel like that we, the players, are sort of the issue when it comes to this faction tension thing. Because now it seems like without the players there, the factions were able to be buddies. If they were a bit more narrative driven and in the Shadowlands made it feel like you were stuck in the Shadowlands with proper phasing of zones and phasing the player from other players while in Oribus, it could have felt as if that you were stuck there in the afterlife for 3 years, at least for the campaign of the expansion. But so that way when you were done with that campaign and you got done with the expansion, you then left and then Dragonflight happens. It's a bit weird, but they honestly should not have done that. What they should have done is they should have just kept the Alliance and Horde at sort of bickering terms when we left and when we came back, but really focus on the Dragonflight expedition. The Dragon Scale expedition. They should have focused more on the Explorer and the Reliquary factions on that. They probably in like a pre-expansion thing, so what they should have done was you quest through Shadowlands, then come back, whatever. We don't really feel the time skip there, but when it comes to the pre-expansion stuff for Dragonflight, what they should have done was have you quest alongside the Explorers League and the Reliquary. Have them talk about how long it's been since you, the player, came back. So that way they can basically get you up to speed about how long you were away. Then that sort of makes the player feel the effects of the last expansion and really understand that things changed since then, while also not necessarily making the Alliance and Horde friendly with one another. And it makes this feel more like it's done at the behest of these two sort of leagues. Now, when it comes to the War Within, I personally just I have issues with the factions in the War Within so far, because it's basically picking up where Dragonflight sort of left off, in that the Alliance and Horde are sort of just friends now, and that with that being a thing, it sort of dominoes back to Shadowlands. The Horde and Alliance being friends dominoed back because we, the players, were in Shadowlands. So it's just very annoying to see Blizzard kind of push this sort of united Azeroth faction while still having the Alliance and Horde, because it feels sort of ham-fisted in a way that makes it obvious that they're gonna focus more on the Azeroth faction as opposed to the Alliance and Horde faction. So they're just gonna have that be the slow move in from the Alliance and Horde into the Azeroth faction, which is not something that I am a huge fan of. Personally, I would like them to keep the Alliance and Horde as separate faction and have them continue being hostile towards one another, but they should have, in my opinion, kept the Champions of Azeroth faction from BFA. Granted, we can rework it to being more, well, less annoying, I should say, and have Champions of Azeroth sort of be, as the name implies, the Champions of Azeroth, who are made up of people from both factions. And have that sort of just be the reason why we, the players, come together to fight these bigger world-ending threats. So the reason why I was talking about the D&D affiliations or the reputations within the World of Warcraft D&D game was because I liked how fluid the reputation system works on the tabletop, and how you start out on the Alliance or on the Horde, but through your actions you can essentially switch sides, which is pretty cool at the end of the day. And honestly, I think that would be a better way to facilitate a sort of no faction sort of deal, because at the end of the day, can I help you, cat? Anyways, so at the end of the day, what players want is sort of a larger player pool for stuff like PvE. And I can understand that. But in my opinion, tearing down the faction walls and just telling players who joined WoW for that faction pride, for the Alliance and for the Horde, kind of does them a disservice. And truth be told, they can incorporate a fluid reputation system like what they did in the Dungeons and Dragons RPG book, because we can see it within the classic faction. If we come down to the Steam Weirdo Cartel, these factions, you start off at neutral, but as you can see, you have the option to toggle at war with these factions, which now makes them hostile because you toggled it as so. So now if I go over to Booty Bay, I can just go over there and start killing people, and that will start removing my RP from Booty Bay, going from friendly to neutral to hated, and so on and so forth. I think Blizzard should be able to reintroduce this kind of reputation system, but make it available retroactively to every faction. And yes, even including the core factions, well, minor factions as well. So, for example, if I wanted to play as a human, but I wanted to be a sort of human who fights on the Horde side, the way this new system would work is that you would have your Alliance faction, and then you also have your Horde faction. Your Horde faction, in this case, would be at neutral, or at least hostile, but not hated, to where you're both just attacking each other on sight. That way, you still have the ability to talk with people, but sort of make it a fun, worthwhile adventure. So like I said, if we were a human and we were trying to be friends with the Orcs of Orgrimmar, we could, let's say, come across the Barons, and say we come across an Orc there. We could do Orc quests. We could do Horde quests, because we are like not necessarily at arms with one another. We could do those quests and earn a reputation with the Horde reputations. That way, you can build that up from hated all the way to exalted, and become this human who is on the Horde side. Because just like in the Dungeons and Dragons book, you started off as a human of the Alliance, but through your actions as the player, you then made that change from the Alliance to the Horde. That would be more fun for the players, in my perspective, and would make WoW truly feel like an MMO RPG, a role-playing game. And not only that, if they were to go down this hypothetical route of a more fluid reputation system, it would benefit them if they redid reputation rewards as well. For example, with these reputation vendors that we have in the cities, they could update their inventory. They could keep the cloaks, change the sizes. And what I mean by that is that we have... Let's bring it up. Okay, maybe a poor decision for the plate wearers. But essentially, we have different styles of cloaks. Actually, I know a better cloak. Let us come over to Ashkramas. Wait, let me just rogue. Yeah, okay. So, in my opinion, they can redo the cloaks to be something similar to this. How, we have the small one, we have a medium, and then we have a long one. They can rework the cloaks to be like that and have you earn it on your way up. So, for example, in the humans for the Stormwind, you can rework this reputation system into being a more fluid reputation system, as we have discussed, and rework the vendors to where they actually include these new items that you earn on your way to being exalted, such as new cloaks, new cloak designs. They can keep the bag, even though they're going to be doing away with bags here soon, at least for the banks, at least. Have the cloaks, have the bags, have the tabards, and introduce new individual faction-themed armor sets. So we can have more line-themed armor sets for Stormwind, and have it in all armor classes. So plate, mail, leather, and cloth. They can really, have the art team go ham on all these new designs for these reputations to sort of revitalize them and incentivize players to, grind them out to earn that cool armor set or those cool weapons or a new mount. The point is that instead of doing away with the factions, they allow players to simply be more fluid with the factions, allowing them to sort of go from one to the other of their own accord, as opposed to having Blizzard make that decision for them. But yeah, at the end of the day, that's sort of what I wanted to just put out there and want people to sort of, think about. Because, at the end of the day, playing WoW is fun for me. Sure, I don't like how the story is being told. Granted, their storytelling is getting better, but at the end of the day, playing an RPG, Blizzard should make you feel like you are in the world. They should make you feel like you are playing, that you are a character in World of Warcraft, on Azeroth, and have your choices actually matter, as opposed to you simply being the problem solver. I don't want World of Warcraft to turn into Destiny. I liked Destiny when it came out. I don't like how Destiny sort of just made you the problem solver and sort of not let you really immerse yourself into the world at large. You were just, as I said, the problem solver, the meathead, the fucking sword that the people use to just kill their enemies. I don't want that to happen to World of Warcraft, because it has more RPG aspects in it from that Destiny doesn't have. And I want Blizzard to focus more on the RPG aspect and making us, the players, feel more involved with the world, as opposed to just being the problem solvers. Because if there's one thing this expansion made perfectly clear to me, was that our characters did not need to be here. This was a box art character story. And what I mean by that is that there was no point that you could sit there and say, yeah, my character made a change here, because in Donegal, on the Isle of Dorne, it was mostly like the Isle of Dorne and the what's that place called? The Ringing Deeps. These two areas are basically just the dwarves. So you have Magni, you have Moira, and you have Daedrin. That's their story, right? And then you come to Hollowfall, that's Anduin's story. Then you come down to Ashkahet, and that's Illyria's story. At no point throughout this entire expansion did I sit there and say to myself, they really needed me for this. Throughout my entire questing here, I felt like I was just a tacked-on observer, the meathead, the person who was just there to ensure things happened. I don't like that when it comes to my RPGs. I want to feel like I am actively involved and feel like I am friends with everyone, because people still call you champion here, and it makes no sense. And honestly, I definitely cringed when I played through the Dawnbreaker dungeon, and as you got on to the Dawnbreaker, the general basically said, "We need your help, adventurers, no champions." And I cringed so hard at that moment. I hated it, because by the process of events when we got there, we were not worthy of being called champions. We were still outsiders to these people. So having a more fluid reputation system, working on the story to involve the character more, would make this feel like an RPG and not just Destiny, but in a fantasy flavor. That's gonna be it for me for now. I'm gonna let you guys go. Thank you guys for coming, and I will see you all in the next video or the stream. Check me out, and I got links in the description. Check me out there, and see you later. Cheers.